Well, good morning. Urs, great to see you. Good morning to everybody that's on. We're so grateful that you're joining us for the first of a series of 6 chats on crisis leadership. I'm Shannon Polson, and I am a keynote speaker and author, Army aviation veteran, and the CEO and founder of the Grit Institute with training for organizations in grit and leadership. And I am really excited to be here this morning with Urs Koenig, who is both a friend and a colleague. Urs, you're also a keynote speaker, a trainer, an executive coach, and also a veteran of the Swiss Army and peacekeeping operations around the world, where you're serving in your current capacity, as well as an ultra endurance competitor. So I think both of us come with a little bit of background in places that are used to leading during times of uncertainty and times of crisis. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely, Shannon. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you, Shannon. Great to see everybody.
Absolutely. So yeah, wonderful to have you all on. We are excited to be starting this 6-week series again, and there'll be short conversations, just 15 to 20 minutes, so that you can get on with your day. But hopefully we can bring a few of the things that we've come across in our work with executives, with businesses, with teams over the last several decades of both of our lives to bear for what you might be facing today. And if you do have any questions that you want to bring up, go ahead and type that into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best if we can to answer them, and if not, to follow up with you later. We're going to talk today about thriving in uncertainty, not just getting through this time, which is certainly uncertain, certainly challenging, and for some really quite frightening, but not just getting through it, but actually thriving in this time, and what we can do to come through really maybe excited about the opportunities that are ahead. And that's not an easy thing to do, but we'd like to talk a little bit about that. We're going to look a little bit at a couple of concepts. We may have time for 2 or 3 of these, but we're going to look at the idea of grounding and horizon, a concept that we're borrowing from Keith Yamashita. And then looking at agility and audacity, if you can imagine at this time, and then trying to take that into where there are really opportunities that can be leveraged to go forward. So now, Urs is the one that introduced me to Yamashita's work. Urs, what do you think about this idea and how we think about grounding and horizon in this environment that we're in?
Yes, thank you, Shannon. So I think what's going on when we hit a crisis, when we're getting flooded with emotions, it's important, first of all, for us as leaders and for our team members to actually slow down and stop, even if we can, and notice what's going on. Notice what's going on. And that's this concept of grounding versus horizon. What happens when we're flooded with emotions like we all were 8 weeks ago? Maybe we still are. We focus on the here and now. It's a survival, right? It's what we naturally do. The metaphorical minefield. We watch the ground. That's the grounding. We watch where we put our boots to survive, to get through the minefield. The metaphor I like to think about is flying with infants and toddlers. From the time that my older son was 3 months old, I traveled to Europe, as many of you know, at least twice per year. And that's all about survival. If nothing else helps, it's only 15 hours out of your life, right? And so that's very much the here and now, the grounding. And yet, we need to be able and help our teams be able to lift our side, both physically and metaphorically, pull our shoulders back and look up at the horizon. And that's what's the shift we need to go through right now, to see what opportunities, as Shannon was saying, and we'll talk about this later, what opportunities are up the horizon? What can we learn from this? So the grounding, survival, and lifting our sides is sort of the ultimate yin-yang of crisis leadership. So that's one concept, and I'll just share one other thing which I think is important as we're thinking about, it's almost a trauma and recovery curve, right? So we were all hit with this crisis, and we had all this initial, fear, and thinking about where are we on the trauma versus recovery curve, and more importantly, where are our team members, and picking them up where they are.
Absolutely. That is such a great point, Urs. And I think that is a really important piece for all leaders to be aware of, is that everybody is at a different place in the midst of this challenge, whether it's a personal challenge or a professional challenge. And I think it's easy to jump to the idea that because I'm ready to move forward, because I'm looking at the next thing, that everybody else is in that same place. And there is a need to sort of step back a little bit and really be aware of where each person is in that journey. And that's always the case, but especially is the case right now. I was just talking a couple of days ago to a group of bookstore owners actually across the country. And I had actually assumed that, again, because I'm in the midst of, okay, how do we pivot? How do we find the next thing? I'd sort of assumed that we were all in that space. But what I realized in the midst of the conversation was there was real fear there. And actually the question that came up was, what do you do when you're afraid? Whether it's because you can't visit that relative that you love so dearly, and that visit is not possible right now because of travel and because of potential contagion, or whether it's that you just don't know how your business is going to come out the other side. And I really had to step back and say, wow, they're in a very different place, and a very natural place to be. Fear is natural, it's normal, and it is also life-saving in some cases. And so what do you do tactically in that moment? And there is that balance. I love how you said that yin and that yang, right? And that balance of making sure that the ground is steady under your feet, that you're watching where you put your feet. And the exercise that I recommended to them, and you and I have talked about this, Urs, but is when you're really afraid to the point of paralysis sometimes, and I think many of us are still in that place right now, is spending the time to sit down and write out what it is that's most frightening, that's most challenging to you. And by writing that out and looking at it, there's an ownership that comes with it, but there's also, you kind of deflate it a little bit. You kind of, and I think you've been the one, Urs, that said that you tame that a little bit, right? By writing it down and by recognizing it for what it is. It's just a thing. And then the next part of that is to say, okay, what are those things that I do have control over? There's so much that we don't have control over. What are the few places where I do have control? Write those down. And then look at tactical steps that you can take, tangible, tactical steps, small ones even, that you can take in the direction of what your goal is, what your vision is, in those areas where you can control. But there is that yin and that yang, because you don't want to be so focused on those steps that you're not looking out at how you might possibly reframe a vision or reframe an opportunity. And again, we'll get to that. So, but I think your point of really balancing wherever you might be with where somebody else is and helping them through that process is a really important thing as we look at our teams and our organizations.
Right. And I love the exercise about writing stuff down, name it to tame it, what can I control? And one last one, maybe two, is change perspective. So what, if anything, can I learn out of this? What opportunities are there that weren't there before? So again, by doing that intellectual exercise, we put a stopgap between the flooding of emotion and our ability to actually go forward in a constructive way. So
absolutely. Well, and that's a great segue into this next idea of agility and audacity. And I think the audacity piece sounds almost like a crazy idea right now, right? I think a lot of us feel a little hunkered down. I think that term has been used a lot. We're hunkered down. We're trying to weather this storm. And the idea for a leader needing to be both agile and adaptable in this time, also audacious, right? Are kind of audacious. I've really thought that that's a critical piece for a leader, because people are looking for the vision right now, right? They're looking for, if not certainty, possibility. They're looking for confidence. They're looking for something to follow to give them hope. And I think a leader has a real opportunity right now to really be able to say, hey, there is a way through this. Here's what this might look like. And it's okay if that something changes over time, because we're in this very fluid environment where we don't know, we don't have a lot of information, we're not sure what's coming up next. But setting that vision and being able to work towards that vision is so important in this time when people's tendency is really to kind of stay inwards.
I love that. So there is some I like sometimes talk about there's purity in this time as well. So a lot of stuff that we felt was important, 8 weeks ago, we actually don't spend much time on it anymore. And some of my most successful clients, they're laser sharp focusing back on their mission, on their why. Like, why are we here? How can we continue helping our clients? And you bring up a great point, Shannon, which is this point about momentum. We can have, and we do all have these strong emotions of fear. Sometimes we feel paralyzed. And at the same time, as humans, we as leaders and all our team members have the need for momentum, having an idea in which direction we're going. I had a conversation online with a former client of mine who was really interested in how do I help my people to come out at the other end? How do we reopen the business? How do I engage them in that process? So I think that's a really excellent point.
No, that's right. I mean, it takes a lot more energy to start again from a standstill, although there may be times when we do need to come to a standstill, but it takes a lot more energy to start again versus to keep going even in small incremental steps. And in the midst of that, I think, and that the adaptability piece of this audacity is really the ability to say, hey, here's the mission, here's the vision, here's where we want to go. We can't move there in the same way that we thought we could. And so what is another way that we can get there? And I think about, there's all sorts of examples of this, but just as a fun memory from way back, thinking about when I was a lieutenant at Fort Bragg and I was part of this attack aviation battalion, and we had just had our funding cut. We had no money to fly, but we were still responsible for being able to deploy and being able to do this mission. And so we couldn't fly. We couldn't fly as a battalion. We couldn't train to do the things that we were expected to be able to do, potentially in life-threatening situations. And I remember the battalion commander, who's the person in charge of these 24 helicopters and all of the pilots that fly them, coming up with this idea that was really fantastic. And we drew this huge chalk map on the hangar floor, and all of us in our teams of two, since our cockpit held two, would walk that route that we would have flown. And then we'd be given these cards along the way that might say, you just had an engine flare out, you took fire from over here. And so you'd constantly have to shift, just like you would in a real life mission. And so instead of saying, hey, we've just had our funding cut, we can't really do this training, we're not able to operate, so we just are gonna have to sit tight, he pivoted. He found another way to accomplish that mission in a very creative way. And I think that's the opportunity right now, is be audacious enough to keep that vision in front of you and your team, and then find creative solutions to get to move in the direction of that vision.
I love that story, of course, Shannon. That's wonderful. And it's leading. We don't have control. We can't have control, but leading with purpose, leading with the vision, with a mission, versus leading by control, which actually is a great segue to our third point here. So we talked about grounding and horizon, the first one. We talked about agility, and I love Shannon's audacity, which you bring to the table with such good spirits here. And the third point really is about seeing opportunities and how do we capture those opportunities. And so people talk a lot about the new normal. I like to talk about the new next, right? So, and people also talk about unprecedented times, and that might be the case. I always feel, well, back after 9/11, if you remember, and back when the Lehman Brothers went under, we didn't know either if and when it's going to stop. We didn't know how this is going to go all unfold. And if we raise our line of sight to the horizon, there are tremendous business and entrepreneurial opportunities. I'm convinced of that, because in all the great disruptions, in the time of huge change, is when there is tremendous opportunities. Just two quick examples. Uber and Airbnb, they both started just around the time of the financial crisis. They would have most likely not been as successful as they are or still are, if it weren't for the fact that people were cash strapped. Imagine you're renting out the room in your house, you have strangers come to your house, you're paying close to taxi rates to ride in somebody else's car. Who would have thought that? And now it's becoming the new next. So similarly, there are opportunities right now. Shannon and I are dealing with it, and I know a bunch of you who are on our Zoom call today deal with the changing business meetings, how business travel is conducted. And of course, there's the whole supply chain from manufacturing to distribution that's being turned upside down. So there is, in great time of disruption, if we raise our line of sight, there are tremendous opportunities. And one thing I love, which is what one of my colleagues is doing, he's starting his morning meetings every day, every single day with his team. How do we make sure we're not letting this crisis go to waste? So how do we make sure we're not letting this crisis go to waste? So a very powerful way to think about opportunities versus just threats.
Absolutely. I love that question. How do you make sure you never waste a good crisis? That's right. And not at all to take away from the very real challenges I think a lot of people are facing at all, but really and this is maybe a great way to pull together all of these things that we've been talking about, is really to say, how do we stay grounded in our purpose, our core purpose? And I think I just read a piece actually this morning, Adam Grant, talking about WeWork and some of the challenges of WeWork, and not staying grounded in that core purpose while they're operating, right? So while you're looking for these examples to pivot, and I love this idea of pivoting, great opportunity to say, what are the opportunities? How do I pivot into those opportunities? Not spending time worried about what we can't do, but looking really and developing what we can do is really just an incredible opportunity. And yet making sure that those pivots are all grounded in that core purpose that we've already established, making sure that we keep the vision and the mission in mind, and that real sense of grounding. And that goes back to that original point of staying grounded, but continuing to go back and forth, looking at the horizon.
Yeah. So one last thing maybe around that is, I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us to bring our people along through this process. I think there is a tendency in crisis leadership as the leader that you feel you have to, grab the reins and yank and to charge ahead and be in control. And yet, as Shannon was saying, we don't know where we're going to go. Really, there's a lot of different scenarios. This is really a time to bring our people along, and as my former client has talked about, incorporate our folks' thoughts and feelings around how do we come out of this? What opportunities do they see? And so I think this is a real opportunity for us to tap into the wisdom of our teams and our staff members.
And Urs, that's the perfect way to kind of bring this around, because any kind of leadership is never about the leader, and it's always about the people, right? And I think that is such a critical thing. There's a nonprofit that I sit on the board and work on the board. And one thing that has been really, really clear in this time, in this last 8 weeks, is that just how critical it is to make sure that there's an extra pause. And so while we're talking about audacity, setting a vision, that there's time and almost a gentleness in allowing people to speak and to be heard and to pause in the momentum. And so while you want to keep that, again, that horizon line in place, that groundedness is not just for ourselves, but really is for our people, because leadership is always about the people first. And I remember, this is a story that I tell many, many times, and actually in almost every keynote, but when I was first promoted to first lieutenant, I remember that same battalion commander saying, the only good use of any power that you have is the responsibility to take care of your people. And that is perhaps more true in a crisis than it is at any other time. And so helping our people through that while we help to set that vision, and taking care of ourselves as leaders too, is all really a part of making that work.
Well said. The day that your soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you stop leading them, right? That's Colin Powell. So absolutely well said, Shannon.
No, that's exactly right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure for Urs and I to be together and to be able to share some ideas with you. I hope that you will send questions and comments to us by email. You can find us at our websites at urskoenigspeaker.com, and I am at thegritinstitute.com. So until next Thursday, we hope you have a wonderful week and go forth with both grounding and your eyes on the horizon.
Great. Thanks. Good to see you all.
Great to see you too. Take care. Bye-bye.